A family does not break the moment trust is lost. It breaks the moment someone chooses doubt over love. 8 years before anyone would uncover the truth, Colton Mercer stood alone in the corner office of Mercer Global Foundation, staring at the city lights beyond the glass walls while a storm gathered over Manhattan. At 46, he was respected by business leaders, admired by politicians, and trusted by thousands of employees. His life appeared flawless from the outside. Yet on that particular evening, a single seed of doubt was about to destroy everything he valued most. Earlier that day, a private message had arrived anonymously. It contained photographs, vague accusations, and carefully crafted suggestions that his wife, Brielle Sutton, had been hiding something from him. None of the information offered real proof. None of it confirmed wrongdoing. Yet the message achieved exactly what it was designed to do. It planted uncertainty. Colton had always trusted facts, evidence, and logic. Ironically, when it mattered most, he allowed suspicion to speak louder than certainty. Across town, Brielle sat at home in the kitchen of their brownstone, grading elementary school assignments while softly humming to herself. She was 7 months pregnant and already imagining what their future would look like once the baby arrived. Family photographs decorated the walls. A tiny nursery waited upstairs. Every corner of the house reflected hope. She had no idea that the foundation beneath her marriage was beginning to crack. When Colton finally arrived home that evening, Brielle immediately noticed something different. He greeted her politely, but the warmth she knew so well seemed distant. His smile looked forced. His eyes carried questions he refused to ask. During dinner, conversation struggled to find its usual rhythm. Brielle spoke about her students. Colton responded with brief answers. Silence settled between them more than once. "Is everything okay?" Brielle finally asked. Colton looked down at his plate. "Just work." It was a simple lie, but it marked the beginning of something neither could yet see. Over the following weeks, the distance grew. Small moments that once felt effortless became strained. Colton spent longer hours at the office. Brielle found herself wondering why her husband seemed emotionally absent. She asked questions, offered support, and tried to reconnect. Yet each attempt met an invisible wall built from suspicion rather than truth. The most painful part was that Brielle never understood the accusation hanging over her. Colton never voiced it directly. Instead, he allowed uncertainty to guide his actions. Meanwhile, someone in the shadows watched the damage unfold exactly as planned. Vanessa Drake, a trusted communications advisor within Colton's organization, understood how influence worked. She understood that people often believed what they feared more easily than what they loved. Every subtle comment, every carefully timed suggestion, pushed Colton further from the woman who had stood beside him through every challenge. One rainy afternoon, Brielle entered Colton's office carrying a framed ultrasound photograph she wanted to share. She found him staring out the window, lost in thought. "I thought you would want this for your desk," she said softly. For a brief moment, emotion flashed across his face. Then it disappeared. He accepted the photograph but placed it aside without looking closely. Brielle felt her heart sink. She did not know why. She only knew something precious was slipping away. And as thunder echoed beyond the city skyline, neither husband nor wife realized they were standing at the edge of a misunderstanding that would alter the course of their lives for years to come. The day Brielle left, there was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation, and no attempt to win an argument that should never have existed in the first place. Instead, there was only silence. A silence so heavy that it seemed to settle into every room of the house. 2 months had passed since the first signs of distance appeared between her and Colton. During those weeks, she had tried everything she knew. She invited conversations. She offered reassurance. She patiently waited for him to explain what was troubling him. Yet every effort met the same invisible barrier. The man who once shared every thought with her now guarded his emotions behind walls she could not reach. On a cold November morning, Brielle sat alone in the nursery folding tiny baby clothes when she finally understood something painful. Whatever was happening, Colton no longer trusted her. The realization broke her heart not because he had accused her of anything. He never did. The heartbreak came from the fact that he had chosen suspicion without giving her the chance to defend herself. That evening, she found him working late in his study. The framed ultrasound photograph still sat untouched on a corner shelf. Dust had already begun gathering on the frame. Brielle stood quietly in the doorway for several seconds before speaking. I cannot keep pretending everything is fine. Colton slowly looked up from his desk. What do you mean? Her eyes filled with sadness rather than anger. I mean, we have become strangers living in the same house. For a moment, he seemed ready to respond. Yet whatever words formed in his mind never reached his lips. The silence that followed answered her question more clearly than any explanation could have. Brielle nodded slowly. That is what I thought. She left the room without another word. 3 days later, she packed 2 suitcases. The process took less than an hour. Most of her belongings remained exactly where they were. She was not trying to erase her life. She was simply stepping away from a place where she no longer felt welcome. As she zipped the final bag closed, her hand rested briefly against her stomach. The baby kicked gently, as if sensing her emotions. Downstairs, the house felt unusually quiet. Colton stood near the front window watching snow begin to fall across the street. He knew Brielle was leaving. He knew she had packed her things. Yet some combination of pride, confusion, and doubt kept him frozen in place. Every instinct told him to stop her, to ask questions, to fight for the family they had built together. Instead, he remained silent. Brielle carried her bags to the front door and paused. Part of her hoped he would say something. Anything. An explanation. A request to stay. Even a simple question. But none came. Finally, she slipped her wedding ring from her finger and placed it gently on the hallway table. Not as punishment. Not as revenge. Only as an acknowledgement that she could not remain where trust no longer existed. When the front door closed behind her, the sound echoed throughout the house. Colton stared at the empty hallway moments later and noticed the ring resting beneath the soft glow of a nearby lamp. A strange feeling settled in his chest. For the first time, the possibility of losing Brielle felt real. Yet even then, he convinced himself he was making the correct choice. Outside, snow continued falling as Brielle climbed into a waiting taxi and looked forward through tears she refused to let fall. She did not know where the future would lead. She only knew one thing with certainty. She would raise her child surrounded by love, even if she had to do it alone. The years that followed were not easy, but Brielle Sutton never allowed hardship to define her life. 8 months after leaving Manhattan, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy in a small community hospital outside Philadelphia. As she held him for the first time, watching his tiny fingers wrap around hers, she made a promise she would keep every single day afterward. No matter what happened, Mason would grow up surrounded by love, stability, and dignity. She never spoke badly about his father. She never filled his childhood with bitterness. Instead, she focused on building a future one day at a time. During the mornings, she taught 3rd grade at a local elementary school. In the evenings, she graded assignments at the kitchen table while Mason colored pictures beside her. Their apartment was small but warm. Family photographs decorated the walls. Books filled every shelf. Laughter filled the spaces money never could. As the years passed, Mason grew into a bright and kind-hearted boy. He loved science projects, baseball games, and asking questions about everything he saw. He inherited Brielle's gentle nature, but there were moments when she noticed traits that reminded her of Colton. The way he tilted his head while concentrating. The determined expression that appeared whenever he faced a challenge. The quiet confidence that emerged naturally even at a young age. Each resemblance brought a complicated mixture of pride and sadness. One evening, shortly before Mason's 8th birthday, he sat beside Brielle on the couch holding an old photo album. "Mom," he asked carefully, "who is this man?" Brielle looked down and saw a photograph she had not opened in years. Colton stood smiling beside her on their wedding day. For a brief moment, memories flooded back. Then she smiled softly at her son. "That is your father." Mason studied the picture. "Have I ever met him?" Brielle shook her head gently. "No, does he know about me?" The question lingered in the room. Brielle chose her words carefully. "Life is complicated sometimes." Mason nodded as though accepting the answer. Children often sensed more than adults realized. Was he a good person? Brielle looked at the photograph again. Despite everything that had happened, her answer came easily. "Yes, I believe he is." Across the country, Colton Mercer continued building one of the most respected organizations in America. Awards accumulated. Influence expanded. His name appeared regularly in headlines and interviews. Yet success failed to fill the emptiness that lingered beneath the surface. The house in Manhattan remained quiet. The wedding ring Brielle left behind stayed locked inside a desk drawer he rarely opened. Over the years, he occasionally thought about contacting her. More than once, he drafted messages he never sent. Something always stopped him. Pride, regret, fear, perhaps all three. Meanwhile, Brielle continued moving forward. She volunteered at school events, attended every baseball game, and celebrated every milestone in Mason's life. She never waited for someone to rescue her. She built a meaningful life through patience and determination. Yet on certain evenings, after Mason had gone to sleep, she would sit quietly by the window and wonder how differently things might have unfolded if trust had been stronger than doubt. Neither she nor Colton realized that after 8 long years, the truth hidden beneath old misunderstandings was slowly beginning to rise toward the surface. And when it finally did, it would change all 3 of their lives forever. The moment arrived on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. Neither Colton nor Brielle could have predicted it. Yet years later, all 3 of them would remember that day as the beginning of everything changing. Mercer Global Foundation was hosting a community education fair outside Philadelphia, bringing together schools, teachers, volunteers, and local families. As president of the organization, Colton attended dozens of similar events every year. Most followed the same pattern: speeches, photographs, handshakes, polite conversations. Nothing unexpected. That morning began no differently. By noon, Colton had already greeted donors, visited exhibition booths, and spoken with community leaders. He was preparing to leave when a group of elementary students gathered near the science demonstration area caught his attention. One boy stood in the center of the crowd explaining a project with remarkable confidence. The child appeared no older than 8. Yet something about him immediately felt familiar. Colton found himself stopping to watch. The boy's enthusiasm drew smiles from everyone nearby. His intelligence was obvious. More surprising was the way he carried himself. Calm, focused, determined. Traits Colton recognized instantly because they mirrored qualities he had spent a lifetime developing himself. As the presentation ended, the boy looked up and their eyes met briefly. An unusual feeling settled over Colton. He could not explain it. He only knew he suddenly wanted to know more about the child. "Who is that young man?" he asked a volunteer. "That is Mason Sutton," the woman replied proudly. "One of the brightest students in the district." The surname meant nothing to him at first, yet the name lingered in his thoughts. Minutes later, he noticed a familiar face approaching through the crowd. Time seemed to slow. Brielle Sutton stood beside the student group, carrying educational materials and speaking with several teachers. 8 years had passed since he last saw her, yet he recognized her immediately. She looked different and exactly the same all at once. Older, stronger, more confident. The sight left him speechless. Brielle froze as well. For a brief moment, neither moved. The noise of the event faded into the background. Memories rushed forward without permission. The nursery, the wedding ring, the front door closing. 8 years of silence. Then Mason ran toward Brielle holding a certificate he had just received. "Mom," he called excitedly. The word struck Colton harder than anything else. "Mom." Brielle smiled warmly and knelt beside the boy. "You did wonderful," she said. Mason beamed with pride. Standing several yards away, Colton watched the interaction unfold. Something inside him shifted. The resemblance he noticed earlier suddenly became impossible to ignore. The shape of the boy's eyes, the way he smiled, even the subtle mannerisms felt strangely familiar. Rationally, he told himself it meant nothing. Yet the feeling refused to disappear. Brielle eventually noticed his gaze. Their eyes met again. Neither spoke. Neither knew where to begin after so many years. Before either could approach, event organizers called Colton away for another presentation. The opportunity vanished as quickly as it appeared. Yet during the remainder of the afternoon, his attention repeatedly drifted back toward Brielle and Mason. By evening, as he sat alone on the flight back to Manhattan, a question echoed through his mind. Why did that boy feel so familiar? And for the first time in 8 years, Colton Mercer found himself looking directly at the past he had spent so long trying to forget. The question followed Colton Mercer everywhere. It sat beside him during board meetings. It accompanied him through interviews and fundraising events. It lingered in the silence of his penthouse long after midnight. Why had that boy felt so familiar? During the weeks after the education fair, He tried convincing himself it was nothing more than coincidence. After all, 8 years had passed. Countless children shared similar features. Rational explanations existed. Yet every time he closed his eyes, he saw Mason Sutton standing proudly beside his science project, smiling with a confidence that felt strangely recognizable. Eventually, curiosity became impossible to ignore. One evening, Colton opened an old storage cabinet in his office and removed a box he had not touched in years. Inside were remnants of a life he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Photographs, letters, a wedding album. Beneath everything else sat the framed ultrasound image Brielle had once brought to his office. He stared at it for several minutes. Dust no longer covered the glass because someone had carefully cleaned it during routine maintenance. Yet the memory attached to it remained painfully clear. For the first time, he asked himself a question he should have asked 8 years earlier. What if I was wrong? The thought unsettled him. Until that moment, he had never truly examined the foundation of his suspicions. He remembered receiving anonymous messages. He remembered subtle warnings. He remembered conversations that encouraged doubt. Yet when he tried recalling actual evidence, the details suddenly felt surprisingly weak. Over the following days, he began reviewing old records, emails, notes, archived communications. The deeper he looked, the more inconsistencies emerged. Certain timelines did not align. Certain claims lacked verification. Some accusations appeared to originate from sources connected through surprisingly narrow channels. For a man who built his career analyzing facts, the pattern became difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, Brielle continued living her life unaware of the storm quietly forming. Mason excelled in school. Baseball season had begun, and most evenings found her sitting in folding chairs beside other parents while cheering from the sidelines. Their routine remained simple and happy. Yet occasionally she noticed herself thinking about the unexpected encounter at the education fair. Seeing Colton again after so many years had reopened memories she believed were long settled. She wondered if he recognized the similarities between himself and Mason. She wondered if he regretted anything. Most importantly, she wondered whether some questions were better left unanswered. Back in Manhattan, another discovery pushed Colton further toward the truth. While reviewing archived Foundation correspondence, he found references to internal reports handled years earlier by Vanessa Drake. At first, the documents appeared ordinary. Then he noticed discrepancies between original communications and summaries that had been distributed afterward. Certain details had been omitted. Others had been emphasized without supporting evidence. The pattern repeated often enough to attract his attention. One afternoon, Colton sat alone in his office comparing records spread across an enormous conference table. The conclusion forming in his mind felt impossible and undeniable at the same time. Someone had influenced his perception years ago. Someone had carefully guided his suspicions without ever presenting proof. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. For 8 years, he had believed he was protecting himself from betrayal. Now he faced a terrifying possibility. What if the betrayal had never come from Brielle at all? And if that was true, then the greatest mistake of his life might have been built entirely upon a lie. Once doubt begins to unravel, the truth often follows faster than anyone expects. For Colton Mercer, the weeks after his discovery became a relentless search for answers he should have demanded years earlier. Every new document he reviewed seemed to expose another flaw in the story he had accepted without question. The deeper he investigated, the heavier the weight of regret became. One evening, long after most employees had left the Foundation headquarters, Colton remained alone in a conference room surrounded by archived records. A trusted legal advisor sat across from him reviewing old communications connected to Vanessa Drake. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, the advisor lowered a folder onto the table. "You need to see this." Inside were copies of messages dating back more than 8 years. Several contained references to anonymous information sources that had never been verified. Others revealed internal discussions where Vanessa repeatedly encouraged assumptions rather than investigations. More troubling still, there was no evidence connecting Brielle to any wrongdoing whatsoever. Not one verified fact supported the suspicions that had destroyed the marriage. Colton felt his chest tighten. "How did I miss this?" he asked quietly. The advisor looked at him with sympathy. "Because you trusted someone you believed was helping you." The answer lingered in the room. Trust. the very thing he had failed to offer Brielle. Over the following days, additional pieces fell into place. Former employees provided statements clarifying events from the past. Archived schedules disproved key claims that once fueled suspicion. Independent reviews confirmed what Colton was beginning to fear. The accusations against Brielle had never been supported by evidence. They had survived only because he allowed doubt to replace communication. Meanwhile, another question continued haunting him. Mason. Every memory from the education fair returned with increasing clarity. The resemblance, the timing, the age. Everything pointed toward a possibility that was becoming impossible to ignore. Yet Colton refused to jump to conclusions again. He had already learned the cost of assumptions. This time, he would follow facts wherever they led. Through legal channels and proper procedures, a formal verification process was initiated. Every step was handled respectfully and confidentially. Brielle was informed and, after careful consideration, agreed. Not because she wanted vindication. Not because she desired revenge. She simply believed Mason deserved honesty about his own story. The waiting period felt endless. During those days, Colton found himself revisiting memories he had buried for years. He remembered Brielle laughing in their kitchen. He remembered painting the nursery together. He remembered the ultrasound photograph he ignored. Most painful of all, he remembered the expression on her face the day she left. At the time, he believed he was protecting himself from disappointment. Now he understood he had been abandoning the person who needed him most. Across Pennsylvania, Brielle experienced her own mixture of emotions. She remained calm for Mason's sake, maintaining their normal routines while quietly preparing herself for whatever came next. She did not celebrate the possibility of being proven right. There was nothing joyful about years that could never be recovered. Some losses remained permanent, even after the truth emerged. Then, on a bright spring morning, the long-awaited report arrived. Colton sat alone in his office, staring at the sealed envelope resting on his desk. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The room felt impossibly still. One sentence near the center of the report changed everything. The results confirmed an overwhelming biological relationship. Mason Sutton was his son. Colton closed his eyes as emotion crashed over him all at once. Relief, shock, joy, regret. 8 years of missed birthdays. 8 years of missed conversations. 8 years spent believing a lie while the family he loved lived without him. And as tears filled his eyes for the first time in many years, he realized the truth had finally arrived. The question now was whether redemption could arrive with it. For several minutes after reading the report, Colton Mercer remained completely still. The city skyline stretched beyond the office windows, sunlight reflecting off glass towers throughout Manhattan, yet he barely noticed any of it. His attention remained fixed on a single page resting on his desk. The truth was no longer a possibility. It was a fact. Mason was his son. Brielle had never betrayed him. Everything he believed for 8 years had collapsed in a matter of seconds. As the reality settled over him, another realization followed close behind. The greatest loss was not the marriage he allowed to fail. It was the years he could never recover. 8 birthdays. 8 first days of school. 8 Christmas mornings. 8 years of bedtime stories, baseball games, report cards, and ordinary moments that quietly become the foundation of a parent's life. Colton lowered his head into his hands. No amount of success could buy those years back. No apology could erase them. Later that afternoon, he requested a private meeting with the board of directors and senior leadership team. The announcement surprised everyone. Colton was known for his discipline and unwavering focus. Yet when he entered the conference room, something about him appeared different. More vulnerable, more human. After briefly addressing organizational matters, he made a decision few expected. Vanessa Drake was immediately removed from all leadership responsibilities, pending the outcome of an independent ethics review. The evidence uncovered during recent investigations had revealed serious professional misconduct involving manipulation of information and misuse of trust. Colton spoke calmly and professionally throughout the meeting. There was no anger in his voice, only disappointment. Once the meeting ended, he returned to his office and looked once more at the photograph of Brielle that had remained hidden in a drawer for years. He realized something painful. Throughout all those years, she had never tried to destroy him. She had never publicly exposed him. She had never sought revenge. Instead, She simply moved forward with dignity while carrying a burden she never deserved. That realization hurt more than any accusation ever could. Across Pennsylvania, Brielle received confirmation that the results had been delivered. The phone call came while she was organizing classroom materials after school. She thanked the representative politely and ended the conversation. Then she sat quietly at her desk for several moments. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a strange sadness for everything that had been lost. Through the classroom window, she watched children playing on the school playground. Their laughter drifted through the afternoon air. She thought about Mason. She thought about the father he never truly knew. Most of all, she wondered what would happen next. That evening, Mason sat at the kitchen table working on a science assignment while Brielle prepared dinner. "Mom?" he asked suddenly. "Yes. Do you think people can make really big mistakes and still become better afterward?" The question caught her off guard. She smiled softly. "I think everyone hopes that is true." Mason nodded thoughtfully and returned to his homework. Brielle stared out the window for a moment. She did not know why, but something inside her felt as though a chapter was quietly ending. Back in Manhattan, Colton stood in the center of his office as evening approached. The report remained folded in his jacket pocket. His car waited downstairs. His schedule for the next 3 days was completely full. Yet for the first time in his professional life, none of those commitments mattered. He reached for his coat, canceled every meeting on his calendar, and walked toward the elevator. After 8 years of silence, 8 years of misunderstanding, and 8 years of regret, Colton Mercer finally knew exactly where he needed to go. The drive from Manhattan to Pennsylvania felt longer than any journey Colton Mercer had ever taken. For years he had traveled across continents, negotiated international agreements, and spoken before audiences of thousands without hesitation. Yet now, sitting alone in the back seat of a car moving steadily down the interstate, he felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Not fear of failure. Not fear of public criticism. Fear that he might be too late. The report confirming Mason was his son rested beside him. He had read it dozens of times during the trip, as though repetition could somehow lessen the weight of what it meant. Every mile carried him closer to Brielle, but it also forced him to confront the reality of what he had done. 8 years earlier, she needed trust. He gave her doubt. She needed support. He gave her distance. She needed love. He gave her silence. Nothing could change those facts. Late that afternoon, the car pulled into the parking lot of the elementary school where Brielle taught. Children were leaving for the day, their laughter filling the warm spring air. Parents gathered near sidewalks while teachers supervised the final moments of dismissal. Colton stepped from the vehicle and immediately spotted Brielle standing near the school entrance speaking with several students. For a moment, he simply stood there. The world around him seemed to disappear. She looked almost exactly as he remembered, yet stronger somehow. Life had tested her, but it had not diminished her kindness. When Brielle finally noticed him, surprise flashed across her face. The conversation around her faded as their eyes met across the distance. Neither moved at first. 8 years of memories stood between them. 8 years of questions. 8 years of pain. Eventually, Brielle excused herself from the group and slowly walked toward him. "Colton," she said quietly. Hearing his name spoken by her again after so many years felt almost unreal. He nodded. "Brielle." For a moment, neither knew where to begin. Then Colton reached into his jacket and carefully removed the report. His voice trembled slightly. "I know the truth." Brielle looked at the envelope and immediately understood. A deep silence settled between them. "I never stopped knowing the truth," she replied gently. The words pierced deeper than any accusation ever could. Colton lowered his eyes. "I know." For the first time in years, the powerful executive who commanded boardrooms around the world looked completely vulnerable. "I was wrong," he said. "About everything." Brielle remained quiet. Not because she disagreed. Because she had waited so long to hear those words that she no longer knew how to respond. Colton took a slow breath. "I spent 8 years believing something that was never true. And because of that, I missed 8 years of my son's life." Emotion filled his voice. "I missed everything." Brielle looked away briefly, blinking back tears. The sadness in his expression was real. So was the regret. Yet pain does not disappear simply because an apology finally arrives. "You did miss a lot," she said softly. Colton nodded. "I know I cannot undo any of it." His eyes met hers again. I am not here to defend myself. I am not here to explain away what happened. I am here because you deserve trust, and I failed you. Mason deserved a father, and I failed him too. The honesty in his words left no room for excuses. Nearby, children continued playing on the school grounds while the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavement. For the first time since their marriage ended, the conversation they should have had years ago was finally beginning. And as Brielle stood facing the man who had once broken her heart, she realized the truth had accomplished something she never could. It had forced him to confront himself. The weeks that followed were neither simple nor perfect. Healing rarely happens in a single conversation. Trust does not return the moment the truth is revealed. Yet for the first time in nearly a decade, the path forward was no longer blocked by misunderstanding. It was illuminated by honesty. After their conversation outside the school, Colton remained in Pennsylvania for several days. He did not pressure Brielle for forgiveness. He did not ask for immediate reconciliation. Instead, he focused on the one thing he should have done years earlier. He showed up. The first meeting with Mason happened in a small park near the baseball field where the boy practiced every Saturday morning. Colton arrived early, nervous in a way he had never experienced before. When Mason finally approached with Brielle beside him, Colton felt his heart race. The boy smiled politely. Hi. Such a simple word. Yet it carried the weight of 8 missing years. Colton smiled back. Hi, Mason. They talked about school, baseball, science projects, and favorite books. Nothing dramatic happened. There were no perfect speeches. No instant transformation. Just a father and son beginning a relationship one conversation at a time. Surprisingly, it was enough. Over the following months, visits became regular. Phone calls became routine. Slowly, trust began growing where absence once existed. Mason discovered that his father genuinely cared about every detail of his life. Colton discovered the joy of hearing about homework assignments, baseball victories, and childhood dreams. Meanwhile, Brielle watched cautiously from a distance. She remained protective of her son while allowing the relationship to develop naturally. More than once, she noticed genuine change in Colton. The man standing before her now was not the same man who allowed doubt to destroy their family years earlier. Success no longer seemed to define him. Humility did. Accountability did. Gratitude did. One autumn afternoon, nearly a year after the truth emerged, Mercer Global Foundation hosted a public education initiative celebrating teachers and community leaders. During the event, Colton stood before a packed audience. Reporters, donors, and public officials filled the auditorium. After discussing the organization's accomplishments, he unexpectedly paused. Then he spoke about something far more personal. He acknowledged the mistakes of his past. He spoke about the cost of allowing assumptions to replace communication. Most importantly, he publicly honored a woman whose strength and dignity had changed his understanding of leadership forever. Brielle sat quietly in the audience beside Mason as hundreds of people applauded. She felt no desire for recognition, yet hearing the truth spoken openly brought a sense of peace she had not expected. After the event ended, the three of them walked together through a nearby garden as evening sunlight painted the sky in shades of gold and orange. Mason ran ahead toward a fountain, laughing as autumn leaves danced across the pathway. Brielle watched him for a moment before turning toward Colton. He is happy, she said softly. Colton nodded. That is what matters most. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Then Brielle smiled. Not because the past had disappeared, not because every wound had healed completely, but because they had finally stopped letting the past control the future. Colton reached for her hand. This time, there was no hesitation, no misunderstanding, no doubt, only truth. As they walked forward together, the years they lost would never be forgotten. Yet they no longer defined the story. The story belonged to what came next. A father rebuilding a bond with his son. A woman whose dignity survived every hardship. A man who finally learned that trust must be protected, not assumed. And a family that, despite years of separation, discovered that love rooted in truth can still find its way home.